The Godox C100 has been on the market for a while now. It is the first camera released by Godox, and it has attracted a lot of attention since its launch. Today, I'm going to focus on one specific feature, the built-in light meter. I'll test the C100 in several different lighting situations and compare its readings with my camera's built-in light meter. Let's see how reliable the Godox C100 really is. Test 1. Indoor Low Light. For the first test, I chose a dimly lit indoor setting. Since the maximum ISO available in the C100's light meter mode is ISO 800, I set it to 800. When shooting handheld, I usually use a shutter speed of 1/125th second to keep the image stable, so I fix the shutter speed at 1/125th and let the C100 calculate the aperture. I then entered the same ISO, shutter speed, and aperture settings into my camera. My camera's built-in light meter showed that the exposure was spot on, so the C100 gave me an accurate reading in this situation. Test 2. Red Roof Outdoors. For the second test, I chose a red roof outdoors. The light was much brighter than it was indoors, so I lowered the ISO to 100. I kept the shutter speed at 1/125th second and once again let the C100 calculate the aperture. I followed the same process and entered the C100 settings into my camera. This time, my camera's exposure meter was about one stop to the right, which means the exposure was slightly brighter than what my camera considered neutral. However, when I looked at the final photo, the exposure still looked completely normal. There were no obvious problems with the highlights or shadows. So even though the two meters did not give exactly the same result, the C100's reading was still usable in a real shooting situation. Test 3. White Roof Outdoors. For the third test, I switched to a white roof and followed the same process. I set the ISO to 100 and the shutter speed to 1/125th second. The C100 gave me an aperture reading of f9. When I checked the same settings with my camera, the exposure meter was still about one stop to the right. However, the final image was still exposed within a normal range. The white roof was not seriously overexposed, and the darker areas still retained enough detail. Once again, the C100 and my camera did not agree perfectly, but the final result was still acceptable. After these tests, I think the Godox C100's light meter is completely usable. In the indoor low light test, its reading matched my camera's built-in light meter almost perfectly. In the outdoor tests, my camera indicated that the C100 settings were about one stop brighter, but the final photos were still exposed within a normal and usable range. So, is the C100 perfectly accurate? I don't think there is a simple answer. Even the built-in light meter inside a Canon camera is not necessarily 100% accurate in every situation. My metering method, or someone else's, may not always be completely consistent either. Outdoor lighting can also change very quickly. Clouds may move, and the light you measure 1 second may already be different by the time you take the photo. Modern cameras also have a relatively wide dynamic range. If the image is slightly brighter or darker, there is usually still room to adjust it afterward. Even without editing, a difference of 1 or 2 stops does not always mean that the shadows will become completely black or that all the highlight detail will be lost. So, I don't think we need to expect the C100 to match another camera's meter perfectly every single time. As long as it gives you a stable, reasonable exposure recommendation that produces a usable photo, then the light meter is doing its job.